Do we have another panelist?
I think we did, yeah.
Yeah. Huh?
We did, I found
Did
it.
you the paneling.
No, I'm not. I don't know, but I'm not. I don't know. So, good. Let's start. The second one. Second one.
In welfare states, this house will refuse to pay for treatments not backed by peer review science. Just kidding. This is gonna be live streamed too.
Yeah.
Hey guys, got it. Yeah. We just- She got three more Christ. Christ. You guys got motion how you're doing?
In welfare states, this house will refuse.
Say again?
In welfare states, this house will refuse to pay for treatment not backed by peer-reviewed science.
Not backed by peer review science.
Yeah.
Okay guys, welcome to the final prelim of HSDO 2014 on the motion that in welfare states this house would refuse to pay for treatment not backed by peer review science. I invite the Prime Minister to start the case.
Mr. Speaker, where there are limitations and scarcities in welfare states in terms of resources, it's important for the state to prioritize treatment which is best for the individual. The state has to ensure your well-being is taken care of at the best possible outcome. We believe one thing is clear on our side, right? We think that you can seek for other treatments on your own interest, but we think that the state will not cover you for that. We think that the state will then counsel and provide you with sufficient information to why peer-reviewed treatments is the best for you and why those are the kind of treatments that will be covered by the state. Let's first clarify the importance of peer review and the weightage that it brings to society and why states should prioritize or place an importance on this, right? The results of peer review treatments which are peer reviewed are standardized. This form of treatment has been proven and has been validied and can be reproduced. So that means this form of treatments can be done over and over again with different other patients, right? Because these treatments have been tested with a myriad of subjects, different genders, different ethnic groups, different age groups. So we think that this is something that's suitable, that has been backed up by science. We think that this form of peer review is extremely stringent. I would know this because I'm trying to write my journals into a peer review board, right? So we think that it's something that's extremely regulated and it's extremely strict. So the regulations of your findings in terms of this treatment has to be proven to be reproducible and right? And we think that this is where, no thank you, I'll take you later. This is where that in terms of peer review, there's a form of respect that exists within researchers and where researchers place heavy emphasis on the safety of these procedures and medicines. We think that these are kind of important values that the state has to take into measure in terms of putting this treatment available for public. We believe that there is a reason why certain treatments are not backed up by peer review because of its safety concerns and because there's no prerogative to put into any form of research into something that can't be proven to be right or can't be reproducible. You may be one person in a million to be able to be cured, so-called, by this treatment, but it can't be reproduced to others. And we don't think the state should take into consideration of that. We think, no thank you. Medicines or treatment which has been proven to be unfit should, by peer reviews, should also not be made available by the state because it endangers the safety of society. What will my substantive be about? My substantive will be looking at, no thank you, my substantive will be looking at the usage of state resources into medical treatments and how peer review treatments backed by peer review is extremely crucial. Because when we want to look at the nature of a welfare state, money is obtained by taxpayers, right? This is where your people have trusted and bestowed this trust in their money to ensure that the state sanctions the best form of services for you, the best form of treatments for you. So we think that the state has to have a reciprocal relationship with the people in terms of providing what is best value for their money. So we think that it's extremely crucial that peer review treatments backed by peer review is the form of treatments that's been pushed for because it has been proven to be successful. Therefore, there's an urgency that the money is spent efficiently. So the money would be spent efficiently because the state must always invest in what necessarily works. Because if a welfare state who has to stretch its resources not only for medical, so also protecting welfare of those poor and others, right? We think the state must be wise in terms of ensuring that the money is well spent in terms of treatments that are successful and that are proven to be able to work. But before that, yes.
Now, logically, bills are normally paid after treatment is done. So in a situation, like probably what you said is now, a person is able to be cured through alternative medicine. Why can't the government foot the bill rather than put this person into debt?
You have to look at this situation present, right? When people go and seek for the treatment, we've told you in our mechanism that will tell you that this is the best form of treatment that's out for you. And if, God forbid, there's a miracle that you went outside and found a BOMO to treat you or something, right? We think that if it worked for you, great that you are alive. But we tell you that the state shouldn't be the one backing up all this form of resources into that form of treatment and validifying when it doesn't necessarily can be backed up by science. Because let's a response to this, right? The state must only endorse something that can be successfully proven. Because if the state goes wrong in telling you that I can go to this individual, you can go get this treatment from this individual, the state will be sanctioning something that's untrue, and the city can get sued as a result of this, right? The state must always ensure the safety of the citizens, because the state must always ensure the safety of the citizens by not providing alternatives that the state itself doesn't know that its consequences, right? Because money must be channeled in options that can maximize its outcomes. So the treatments must, i.e., the treatments must save lives, firstly. It must also be effective. So we believe that the maximization of resources is extremely key in today's debate. Because when you pay for something, a treatment that is ineffective or has a chance of failure, we think that when you're dealing with lives, state shouldn't be the person that plays yo-yo with your life, isn't it, Mr. Speaker? Because the state must always give the option that is best in terms of protecting the individual's life. We believe that their side have to show us that by state allowing this, that the state can ensure 100% success rates, or the state can prove to us that this individual, they are not playing with this individual's life. What has side proposition brought to you into this debate? Side proposition have clearly defined to you the importance of peer review sciences in terms of treatments and medicines, and how it is proven, and therefore, given that there is a form of validity, that is the kind of treatments that state must perform towards individuals in terms of protecting the individual's lives. For all those reasons, we are proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister. I now get the case of the opposition. I invite the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chair, before I start the debate, I would like to remind the audience here, yes, you're looking at a fat guy who's talking about health, but that does not mean my credibility actually drops down in this debate. Let's see where exactly that has actually mischaracterized when it comes to peer review science to a certain extent. Because we are not willing to defend somehow medication that would actually kill another person. We're not going to defend rat poison to that extent, because we believe things that are already dangerous would probably logically be banned in the first place. So that is not the debate. But the debate is more about defending probably placebos, or probably surgeries that have not been approved in a certain country yet, or probably not has been approved yet within it. But aside from that, let's look also at the characterization of welfare state without actually understanding what it means to be a welfare state. Because in it, as a citizen, you have the legitimate expectation for a social safety net, regardless if it is supported by the majority of the people within or outside the country or not. A great example would be unemployment benefits in Scandinavian countries, where there is no actual guarantee tied to it that you must get a job after a certain amount of time. You would still get unemployment benefits. The result does not matter over here. But before I move on to my arguments, which is a really cool and important argument here, I have several rebuttals to actually say. Firstly, is that they spoke about the idea of scarcity. But for that, that means they have to stop several different treatments when it comes to scarcity and situations that does not have a guaranteed outcome. Probably they should have banned chemotherapy in the first place. They should even have banned palliative care in terms of placebo then. If the states in status quo already allows that and somehow just gives them to actually assist or alleviate the lives of people to make them actually feel better within the palliative care, we see no difference over here. Second, I spoke about the good points on peer review. Yeah, we do agree. Nothing to argue about that. But there are things aside from peer review that cannot actually be accounted to. Third of all, they spoke about accountability. Yeah, we agree on that too. Sue the company that gave you false advertising. We are not going to stand for false advertising by the companies, but somehow would say that let's get the government to foot the bill for a certain alternative medicine that could probably work and might not work for certain people. Then we say go ahead because it does not harm that person. But fourthly, My POI just now was really important. What if a person is actually able to somehow gain certain benefits from alternative medicine? Maybe his life is safe, or probably cure certain diseases. I don't know. I've never actually been to acupuncture. But let's look. What they're trying to do over here is that somehow these people, at the end of the day, when mainstream medicine has already failed them, and practically somehow they have to resort to alternative medicine, which is the underground over here in comparison to the mainstream. That means that this person will be forced into that because of the failure of the government in the first place. We are not going to stand for that within this government, and we're going to be a government that is logical in actually assisting people to foot the bill when it comes to our past failures to this debate. What I'm going to talk about is practically the asymmetry of power. But before that, Vijay.
People who seek alternative medicine are most probably not going to be cured and are able to prove that their condition has improved. Therefore, they can't claim money back from the government. Wouldn't they be in debt also?
Look, that logic also applies to placebos. That means you have to explain about why exactly it's okay for government to actually regulate placebos in the first place, because that's happening in status quo or in any other form of palliative care that we talk about. It is no different here. If you want to talk about dangerous materials, those kind of things are bad. It's not logical for governments to allow people to consume red poison. But let's look at the symmetry of power. For that, we have to understand, how do people get into peer review? Unfortunately, Avinash didn't explain throughout, despite him being into the process. Because within this submission process, it is normally inherently biased because it is controlled by either universities or MNCs. And most of the times that this, is about who ticks the right boxes and who actually sound convincing, or probably who people have proper context on who can actually write on papers for them. So this relates to three different things. Is that firstly, MNCs are able to dominate the process due to their interest in controlling the market, which creates they need to have a perception of control in order to secure investors, because they has a stake within the market also. Second of all, there's an inherent bias to newer and smaller companies, because it's harder to achieve credibility because the scientists that you have are either probably new or you don't have a big R&D system, just like Fraser at the end of the day. Thirdly is the cultural bias that you have, that people have. Because the first reaction that people have towards traditional medicine is always negative, because they think that is something in the past from 16th century China. Let's be logical here. It took years for Chinese medicine to actually be recognized due to the undue influence that it has within Western markets, or undue advantage by corporations, especially in terms of Western medicine or the mainstream form of medicine. We don't mind being the hipsters and looking underground here. But so what happens to these companies that fell? This is the second part of debate. Is that firstly, most of them wouldn't be able to do any form of resubmission into this peer review, because firstly, it is too expensive for retesting, and they would normally fall out of favor or go bankrupt. What would normally happen here? Two different scenarios. Is that firstly, they get bought by bigger companies where their patent is now transferred towards them. Now the patent is no longer owned by the smaller SMEs or smaller companies. So a lot of good companies, but small ones, are unwilling to go through this process. So when you have smaller companies who probably find a certain cure to its flu to an extent, and it's actually legitimate to actually sell them within pharmaceuticals or even clinics, somehow at the end of the day, they're not willing to go through the process because the process is cheap. Or probably even within the smaller communities, they don't even have the scientific knowledge to actually get the same context that you might have within an MNC. So that is a huge gap that you might have within a person who is starting a small company and a big company. But second of all, is that when some companies that actually go bankrupt, they'll probably not get noticed and fall into obscurity instead, and hiding the possibility of these companies being the better pharmaceutical company instead. So they have no chance at all, and it's no different from bigger companies bullying at the end of the day. So companies that circumvent this process are able to put their products in the market, people are able to pay them with government checks or bonds, allowing people to discover them and allow the possibility of accidentally discovering medicine that could work. Because sometimes when it comes to palliative care, hope is also really important. So the very fact that you have a certain hope that the government would assist you in achieving certain medicine that is not famous yet, that is good enough, because it's no different on how we actually treat certain diseases by making people feel good within the hospital itself. But what is the main conclusion throughout all of this? Is that firstly, we allow the smaller companies that couldn't afford the same rigorous scientific methodology that only huge R&D departments can do so, because now they have technically government funding to assist even smaller companies. Second of all, we are able to counter inherent cultural bias that exists within the status quo. Traditional medicine would be able to get quick, instant recognition if it works, and people somehow recommend them towards other people, and the government gives certain form of recognition towards that. Thirdly, you stop bullying from pharmaceutical MNCs that buys up small companies that go bankrupt, stops patents inequity, and stops only being the big company MNCs to all these patents instead. And lastly, it's a power to the people, because now no longer just a group of scientists controlling the market and not and getting funding, but allow people on the ground to get funding. Please democratize our healthcare system. Vote for opposition.
Yes.
I think the opposition on fees against the government, I made the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, I have three main arguments for you today. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about how our proposal incentivizes alternative medicine to apply for peer review in order to get the kind of recognition and approval that they need. Secondly, on how that leads to a better regulation of alternative medicine, which is in the best interest of society. And thirdly, the fallout from governments supporting unapproved or untested alternative medicine. But before I go into that, a few rebuttals for side government, for side opposition. Let's look at what the funny things that they came up, because according to them, alternative medicine that are not peer-reviewed are placebos and some unapproved surgeries. Firstly, if it's an unapproved surgery, it's probably unapproved for a reason. One, that is dangerous, that it threatens the life of that individual, or that it's just simply not been tested enough. And in these cases, you need to test, because anytime you do an invasive maneuver, and it's an invasive procedure where you're cutting someone open, you need to know for a fact that it's going to work. When you talk about placebos, the reason that placebos are allowed under our paradigm is one, they are peer-reviewed. Secondly, the effects of placebos are psychological. They are used to deal with ailments, sit down, Terence, where people don't have something physically wrong with them, but mentally believe so, a condition common in the older generation. So you give them placebos to elevate that, to form a to address their psychological problems so that they get physically healthy. That takes care of that. Let's look at the really funny things that he talked to us about. Because if basically you listen to Terrence's speech, he assumes that every country in the world has a biased national government, because they are so corrupt, they are so power hungry, they are culturally biased, they are going to push sideline everyone and buy up all the patents, right? Hugely assumptive. Let's look in the context of what we brought to you today, the idea of welfare states. Firstly, when you talk about this asymmetry of power, you have to understand who does peer reviewing, something Avinash explicitly told you, because peer reviewing are done by scientific researchers who are employed in, guess what, public as well as private institutions. So therefore, in welfare states such as Scandinavian countries, which have fantastic universities, such as the University of Helsinki, where they have fantastic researchers, those universities, those public entities are capable of conducting this peer review. They themselves wade into the research and ensure the details, ensure that there is no form of asymmetry of power. There is a balance. Peer review isn't just conducted by MNCs. MNCs fund research. We agree to that. But when it comes to the peer reviewing, it is always done by people who are recognized in the field. Researchers, lecturers, professors. It is not simply done by any Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? Something that they feel to engage with. Second idea that they told you was, now we're going to have a problem with patents because all the small companies are going to get bought up by all the big companies and all these drugs are going to be discriminated against, so something to that effect, right? Quite unclear coming from their side. But let's look at it logically. Again, like what we told you, right? When you look at the form of patent laws, right, the reason you have patents is to protect the smaller companies. Now, if a smaller company decides to sell its patent to a bigger company, that's that company's prerogative. We've got nothing against that. But more importantly, when you have these forms of peer review, when you force the smaller companies to peer review their products, you give them even more power, because they now know that their products are tested, their products are approved, and that allows them a marketing platform to build upon, to ensure that their products can now compete with your big R&D companies, that it can have a proper form of valuation. I'll deal more with that in my substantive, so before I go on, go ahead.
If you can see that placebos can give benefits in terms of psychological benefits, and they get funded also at the same time, why not the same alternative medicines who give psychological benefits?
Okay, thank you. I'll deal with that in my substantive firstly, right? Let's look at alternative medicines. The examples that we brought out, such as Chinese medicine, acupuncture, these forms of medications that have been around for a while but haven't been peer reviewed. Why does the state not agree to it? Because the state does not know the outcomes of this medication. Whenever someone takes it, different people respond differently. There's been no proven scientific background. What do these alternative medicines do? Do they go for peer review? No. Why? Because there is no prerogative for them to do so. They don't see the interest, they don't see the need, because under status quo, they still can open up their shops. They still have people visiting their shops and they can still get money from it, right? So there is no need for them to push for peer review. Under our paradigm, what we are doing is we are forcing these alternative medicines to rethink their calculus. We are telling them that, look, when you are peer reviewed, we pay for you. We will approve whatever treatments you are doing, whatever procedures. And why is it beneficial? I'll deal with that in 3 levels. Firstly, when you force traditional medicine to be peer reviewed, you allow for these medicines to now have an approval attached to it. You allow medicines that have been proven to work to now be able to advertise the fact, something that they're not allowed to do in status quo. Now people, even modern physicians, can turn to these alternative medicines because they now know that these medicines work. Under status quo, no doctor recommends Chinese medicine, probably outside of Malaysia, because quite frankly, they don't believe in it. But when you have this approval that peer review has generated that shows that these medicines have been proven to work, then these doctors are more likely to recommend them. You allow greater number of people sit down to have better access to drugs or to medications that can help them, right? And that's very important. Onto a second level. Why is this? How does it help us when these drugs under peer review are proved to be non-effective or dangerous? And that's my second argument, right? Because when you prove that these drugs are dangerous, you now allow for better regulation. Under status quo, we don't know which alternative medicines are going to help you, which alternative medicines are going to kill you or maim you, right? But when you have peer review, when you find out exactly what the medicines are going to do, what are the drug-drug interactions, what are the side effects of these medications, you allow for them to either, one, be administered properly in dosages, to be administered properly so as to not endanger people. Secondly, you allow for the medicines that cannot be administered, that are extremely harmful, to now be taken off the market. You give government that knowledge that they can now ban these alternative medicines that are going to cause harm, because under status quo, no one knows which is it. So on 2 levels, you help people because you protect them, you allow them to have proper administration of medicine. Secondly, you ensure that medicines that shouldn't be allowed to be sold will now no longer be sold. On to my last argument for you today. What happens when the government when the government pays for alternative medicines which aren't proven? Firstly, you have to look at the effects of it. If a person takes alternative medicine and they fall ill after that, or something more dire happens, they will hold the government accountable, because by paying for them, the government has this form of ownership, of assumed responsibility, because it is their money that's funding that. So this is situations where these people are likely to sue the government. On a second level, the government now becomes forced to take care of them, because you now have to treat them not just for their underlying condition, but also for the problems that they have incurred due to that alternative medicine that you paid for. Those are burdens the government cannot afford to incur. For that, we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister. If you need the case opposition, I invite the Deputy to hear.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's very funny when side government talked about the idea of peer review equals to protection. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not the case, because whenever we're talking about things like medicine, ladies and gentlemen, whenever it has different consequences to different people. But the problem is, from side government, is this. What they're trying to do is they're trying to translate the burden and allow people to sue this company, ladies and gentlemen, for the things that they never want to have any intention to do with it. As an example, if I take a medication that is peer reviewed by that company, ladies and gentlemen, where alterations are made without that consent of the company, ladies and gentlemen, you now make this company, ladies and gentlemen, to have an extra burden, for them to have an extra burden to pay back the sue from the society, ladies and gentlemen. Whereas in our proposal, ladies and gentlemen, we think that it's better for you to have a direct liability from the company, ladies and gentlemen, to the people, ladies and gentlemen, and not about how this peer and not to the share
of responsibility from this peer, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, on the idea of dangerous stuff, we don't think that dangerous stuff is allowed within the status quo, because if it's proven in initial process of the R&D, ladies and gentlemen, it will be completely banned by the government and also these other scientists, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the kinds of check and balances that already exist within the status quo, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the kinds of things that are already talked about within Teresa's speech, but never been dealt by the second speaker. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, on the idea of the peer review in itself, we think that peer review, ladies and gentlemen, is just, yeah, we consider at certain times that it holds benefit, but in this certain situation, ladies and gentlemen, where those products, where those product has different consequences, peer review only provide only just a form of scientist recommendation towards the public, ladies and gentlemen. What if these scientists, ladies and gentlemen, have different demographics or different values or different belief to that particular product, ladies and gentlemen? Things like racial biasness, ladies and gentlemen, and also scientist preference towards the product, ladies and gentlemen, will get in a way, in terms of that very product to be out there within the market, ladies and gentlemen. We think it's very important, especially when I talked about things like small corporation and also small company, ladies and gentlemen, wanting to have their product in the market, ladies and gentlemen. We think it's very important for you to acknowledge that. Sit down. Firstly, I'll talk about a few things, but I will integrate all my rebuttals within my speech. First, on the idea of payment from government. What does the payment from the government mean? Payment from the government, ladies and gentlemen, also means control, because side government have this idea that whenever government give out money, ladies and gentlemen, government don't have any control in it. False. When government gives you out money, ladies and gentlemen, government will not give it out blatantly. There are certain standards and also certain regulations that you as a corporation need to meet, ladies and gentlemen, because if the government found out that it is harmful, ladies and gentlemen, the government will take away that fund and stop your research there, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the kinds of check and balances to mitigate the very harmful drugs to be out there within society. But secondly, on the idea of people's choice, ladies and gentlemen, we think that our proposal allows this kind of myriads of medicine to be happen and to be out there within the status quo, especially when you have different society that come out from different demographic, ladies and gentlemen, because we need to consider that these different medicines, ladies and gentlemen, have different consequences to different people. As an example, acupuncture may not have effects on you, but it have effects on me, ladies and gentlemen. And also we need to consider things like religion and also faith, ladies and gentlemen. We need to consider the fact that these people choose and opt into acupuncture, ladies and gentlemen, because they felt a sense of relief and also a sense of nirvana whenever they opt into this kind of acupuncture and also this kind of treatment, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we think that it's very important for government to acknowledge that very choice of the individuals, ladies and gentlemen. Because under side government proposal, what they're trying to do is they're limiting those very choice, ladies and gentlemen. Because right now, you need to get your product to be peer reviewed by all of the scientists, and your product need to be agreeable by the scientists, ladies and gentlemen. What happens if your product are not as famous as the other product, ladies and gentlemen? Your product will never be out there, especially when you are starting from a small corporation. Secondly, on the idea that how money should be allocated smartly. Sit down. They accuse that on our proposal that money in a welfare state, ladies and gentlemen, will not be allocated smartly because because it doesn't have definitive positive effect. But wait a minute, if your yardstick to state support through fund is about effectiveness and is about effectiveness, are you okay with not allowing R&D to happen? Because in status quo, ladies and gentlemen, especially when the basis of R&D is about trial and error and never about definitive good effects, ladies and gentlemen. Like we didn't just because we didn't find the cure now, and definitely that doesn't mean that we'll never find the cure in later or future. These are the kinds of potential benefits that you're not. These are the kinds of potential benefits, ladies and gentlemen, that some opposition are not willing to disregard especially when things like chemotherapy and also correctional therapy for autism and also for autistic patients, where it's not proven to be to have positive effects to the patient. These are the kinds of things, ladies and gentlemen, but then due to this patient are willing to opt into this kind of treatment and are willing to give consent to have this kind of journey for them, ladies and gentlemen, for the sake of religion or for the sake of faith and for the sake of potential benefit, ladies and gentlemen. Why is it then wrong for you as a government to recognize that very consent and to recognize that very choice, especially when you are in a welfare state, ladies and gentlemen, where welfare state should always recognize people's choice. Thirdly, on the idea of what would a pay for treatment means, we think it is a form of more incentive to be given, especially in medical world, especially for you to run your business where you as the lowest common denominator where you are the lowest common denominator in that sphere, where you are a small corporation wanted to compete with other big MNCs. You will further be incentivized to better your. We think that the pay from the government is also a form of further incentivization for you to better your product, because in order for you to get your product there, and your product need to be famous, and your product need to be famous and recognized by society. You face the market competitiveness, and the market will become extremely competitive. And before your product get there and have that name, your product need to be proven to have positive effects, and so that public will buy it. And the fact that this market operates on the fact that this product operates on the market, operates on the idea of supply and demand. We think that there's a natural check and balances there. Because if your product is not working, your product will not be able to reach the society. You will not reach those people, and therefore we think that it's for natural check and balances. With all those reasons, go with our opposition.
Yeah.
And then the previous speaker, I'm going to end the substantive features for side government and let the government with here.
Mr. Speaker, Nirvana might cure the death-to-lethal opposition of cancer, but I think for 99.99% of the population, it doesn't work. That's why a state necessarily shouldn't sanction such ridiculous accusations that certain medicine work. I have three issues to talk about today. Firstly, on the maximization of state resources, which bench maximizes better. Secondly, on this alleged biased peer review culture that they wanted to insist in today's debate. And thirdly, what is best for alternative medicine out there? Which side pushes it forward? We say it our side, we do fare better. So firstly, maximization of state resources. My Prime Minister came out and told me that this debate is from a state's perspective. A state's perspective where there are limited resources. A state's perspective, especially in the welfare state, where essentially there's a social contract where people trust their money to the state in reciprocal effect, that their money will be utilized to the maximum effect, to get the bang for your buck, that your money is used to the maximum value that it could bring to society. So necessarily, for example, state doesn't allow policemen to hold guns that are not tested, because it's just a waste of bloody resources. State doesn't allow people to teach superstitious science in schools, because it's just proven not to be working. It doesn't prove effective to you as an individual in the future, or you to accept it to any university. So state doesn't waste money on things that are not proven, because you need to channel the most effective, because essentially if you don't do so, then it's the betrayal of the trust of other people who think that your alternative medicine is ludicrous. It should be channeled to better things. We also talk about the idea of litigation and how people can now sue the government. Essentially the government is allowing them to pay for alternative medicine that is proven not effective, or even worse, proven toxic to them, and they go and land in the hospital. We think that this is essentially a drainage of resources away from the government sector. But they don't want to talk to you about the scenario. Oh, please sit down. What if this person takes alternative medicine and is subsequently cured? Shouldn't we save him from death? We say that the harm of state intervening and saving him from death is to encourage and to validify, for example, the alternative medicine that is not proven. You encourage other people to choose that option. Why is it bad? Because other people, when taking this medicine, might not produce the same result, because simply not standardized. One alternative traditional Chinese medicine shop is completely different from the other one in Klang, from Petaling Jaya. So essentially, there's no standardization, unlike hospitals. Even if it's standardized, the same effects won't occur to the different people. Different people have different composition, and you do not know the kind of interaction of these chemicals towards these people at the end of the day. You're not regulated, you're not controlled, you're not peer reviewed. You're encouraging people to go so, and the gamble and risk that somehow I'll cross my fingers and hope that it saves me, and then I hope that I will go to the government to get my money back. We don't think this is an advisable solution to take. What our policy is more cogent. We advise them to say that these are the benefits of alternative medicine. Necessarily, if it's really your choice, if you're so stubborn to waste your money on alternative medicine, go and do so. We are recognizing your choice. They're saying that we're somehow removing their choice away. But essentially, we're not removing their choice. They can go for it. But essentially, the state doesn't come in and pay for it. Pay for using other taxpayers' money to validify an alternative medicine that's proven to be not effective, essentially. Please sit down. So the second idea is this. They want to talk about, oh, why not placebos? Because essentially, they are also not pre-reviewed. Essentially, firstly, because placebos essentially are merely sugar pills that do not harm your body. Unlike alternative medicine that might mix your that when mixed together with conventional medicine chemicals, might produce an adverse reaction to your body that you will never be able to regulate, because peer review doesn't necessarily prove that, essentially. But secondly, we think that placebos are conducted in a controlled medical environment where they also give these people modern medicine, where it's regulated by doctors, where they are putting you in an environment that is well regulated as according to peer-reviewed journals, and they are proven to be the most effective environment for you out there. And we think that psychological medicine is also a form of medicine that is recognized by science and peer-reviewed journal. So the idea of placebo doesn't apply. I'll take one.
See, when you concede, since all three of you did not want to engage this, when you concede that psychological benefits from other medicines that may not be effective on people is okay, then why is it that psychological benefits from alternative medicine is not okay when the government would already ban things that might kill people?
Because, like I said, placebo is 100% safe. Alternative medicine, you might not know it's effective or not. It might be even toxic to you because it's not peer-reviewed, essentially. Those are the things that you really need to take into consideration. It's not merely a psychological thing at the end of the day. But even so, the state shouldn't come in and step in and pay for it. Secondly, this biased peer review culture. They assume that there's a domination of multinational corporations that inhibits small corporations to peer review their medicine. We think that universities already provide an alternative platform. Universities that are very reputable in welfare states like in Scandinavian countries, they are able also to conduct this peer review. So I don't understand why MNCs suddenly dominate the peer review culture and will not only give results that benefit them. Even if, Mr. Speaker, the only MNCs dominate, we think that there's always competition between Bayer, Merck, and GlaxoSmithKline to identify which of your competitors' product which might not be beneficial. Because there's an incentive for them to prove that their medicine does not work. Or even if it works, necessarily, might also gain profit from it. I might review it and then I might modify it so they can sell it at a higher profit. So multinational companies do have that essentially competition and regulation among themselves already. I don't understand where they're going on this point. Please sit down. Then there's someone wanted to talk about racial discrimination and social discrimination, something which I didn't understand. I mean, the state can always come in to prevent and enforce any kind of discrimination or tests and experiments between people. But let's go on to the third point. Which side of the house puts best for alternative medicine? We encourage a culture of peer review, something my Deputy Prime Minister talked extensively. Now, these alternative medicine people will no longer be lax and just hoping that their medicine will work. They will be encouraged to peer review, because by doing so, then necessarily you are able to be tapped into the medical system that its welfare states are providing. They're able to have a lot of patients nowadays. They're able to have a lot of clients because they are recognized by the state as an alternative to conventional medicine. So you push them to go forward for all this peer review and all these sort of things. We don't want to risk. They say that, oh, we will sue these private companies if they are proven to be fraudulent. But we don't want people to suffer and to be harmed first. Only you come and step in and say that I wanted to sue you. By then, thousands of people could have been harmed by your private companies, and the state is not willing to take that risk. But we say that if, for example, Mr. Chair, litigation happens and it's always in the news, and litigation amplifies the fact that traditional Chinese medicine is not working in one or two circumstances, it brings a bad name for alternative medicine necessarily. And that regresses alternative medicine even more, especially when one or two failures are magnified in the courts and the newspaper and the media. Your side represents alternative medicine. We encourage that. For all those reasons, we are proud to oppose.
Yeah.
And then the government will, and then the government to decide opposition. I invite the opposition here.
ladies and gentlemen, what side government has been harping us constantly is on the fact that supposedly alternative medication is ineffective. We tell you why, ladies and gentlemen, there is no medication on earth with a 100% success rate, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that things such as success rate is always going to be subjected towards the recipient of such a treatment, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you, for example, chemotherapy might work on individual A but might not work on individual B. We see that things like this already exist in medication in hospitals. But why can't we, when these things are also certain in alternative medication, why do you not allow this venue to be open, ladies and gentlemen? What came up in all their speeches is that they tell us that supposedly alternative medication is still open for the public to use. They're just not going to pay it. What we're telling you is that alternative medicine is going to die, ladies and gentlemen, when you don't allow this, ladies and gentlemen. What happens is you kill it because there's no funds coming in from any source, ladies and gentlemen, to actually help these companies producing this alternative medication. The choice is not going to be there, and people are going to be forced to actually take conventional medication, and they're not going to be open to any choices at all, ladies and gentlemen. For example, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that the choice for a person, for an individual to actually choose a conventional medication that might cause pain and an unconventional medication that gives them peace of mind but might not actually cure them should be open, ladies and gentlemen, because what we believe is that that a medication is not just about the curing of the patient, but also about what eases them in the process of recovery, ladies and gentlemen. We think that both these accountabilities are what creates a medication that should be accepted, and not just what cures you but gives you ultimate pain, ladies and gentlemen. We think that what they're doing is they're not taking into consideration what the patients want and what the patients need for themselves, ladies and gentlemen, and that is something that is harmful to their case. So, ladies and gentlemen, what am I going to talk to you about? I'm going to talk to you about, firstly, the idea of medication, peer-reviewed against non-peer-reviewed. Secondly, on the idea of whether there is a need for a check and balance for this alternative medication. And thirdly, on what would paying for these treatments mean, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, on the fact on peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed medication. We already told you that non-peer-reviewed medication, not all of these alternative medications are not peer-reviewed because of choice. We tell you that the avenue is not there for them to actually have it reviewed, ladies and gentlemen. There's things such as a financial restraint when these small companies are fighting an uphill battle and they're fighting against bankruptcy just to prove the legitimacy of their products, ladies and gentlemen. They opt not to because they don't want to have that case, that problem there, ladies and gentlemen. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, only certain bodies are able to give out these peer reviews. We tell you that these bodies are extremely picky, and when they see this small company, they immediately trash them down, ladies and gentlemen, because they think like, oh, you're not legitimate enough, and this hinders things that are still in the process of actually being developed, ladies and gentlemen. Medications that are underdeveloped will die. Newer forms of medication, newer forms of recovery will no longer be available, and this in turn renders R&D, like we have already told you in the first place. So other than that, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that there's no need in a check and balance in society. We tell you that the market demand is the check and balance as it is. If there is a market demand, we tell you that there is form of testimonies that are already in place in public where they prove that to a certain extent, at least there are some cases where these alternative medications work. And ladies and gentlemen, what they keep on telling us is that harms might have occurred in alternative medication. We tell you that these patients that opt for these alternative medications know about the potential harms that are going to happen to them, and they're open to it. So why we tell you, why can't we allow them to have it if there is a chance that they believe somewhere deep down that is the pure cure and not the pill that is given by the government? So,
if the state exists to protect its citizens, tell me how the state is able to assess a medication safety without peer review.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. What we're telling you is that you're not allowing this alternative medication to ever have this peer review. What we're having is when we pay them, ladies and gentlemen, they have more avenues to actually be legitimized by peer reviews. What we're doing is we're actually elevating them to a certain extent until society can until it reaches a certain level where where people go like, hey, actually this is kind of a legitimate form of medication. Why don't and then they are actually, these peer reviewers actually accept them wanting to be peer reviewed in the first place. You know, we tell you that right now there's no avenue for them to be peer reviewed as a whole. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, what would paying for these treatments mean? Firstly, it helps smaller companies because, ladies and gentlemen, right now they already know that they're fighting an uphill battle. They realize that they're not bringing in a conventional thing. They realize that they're not being backed up by society, and they know that they're going to die out. And what's happening is you're disincentivizing the future of new medication. And what's going to happen is you're going to end up with set A to B of medication, and that's just going to be it, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you certain medication might not have a physical reaction, but what happens is it gives the patients a sense of security. It gives them a psychological acceptance, and we think that that in itself is a form of recovery. That in itself is a form of rehabilitation, and we believe that it should be legitimized because of this. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we believe is that we believe that patients should be allowed to have the avenue of choosing what kind of medication they need, and what we are doing is actually we're giving the choice to the patients themselves, and we're actually opening up more alternative medication to actually have more future legitimate medication in our hospitals that can be used by all people, ladies and gentlemen. That is what we're proud to.
I thank the opposition whip. And now, to start reply speeches, I invite the opposition reply speaker.
Mr. Chair, when the state has already failed a person, that is where they try to look for alternatives. But when the state does not want to prescribe to these alternatives, despite it might work for some people, we believe that it's a form of negligence on the part of the state, because you force them into paying things they couldn't afford in the first place. May as well you don't allow any form of social welfare at the end of the day, because you don't want to actually help people on the ground. But what's the burden on our side? We believe that state government is too mainstream, and we on opposition are going underground here. Our burden is practically to show that the alternative medicine, to fund it, regardless whether it's effective or not, is in the interest of the state. The other burden is that if it works on people, why exactly we should not actually somehow pay for it and allow them to actually suffer in terms of that. They have to prove to it. None of them show why exactly it's justified for the people to suffer. Our yardstick is simple. As long there is no harm, effective or not, that's a different question. Because we believe psychological benefits, it's already good enough. The yardstick at the end of the day is in the form of effectiveness. But wait, that is contradictory on certain levels. Why? Because they are okay with chemotherapy, they are okay with placebos. Because those kind of things are not totally 100% effective, but those kind of things also are sometimes only provide psychological benefits. And when they talk about chemotherapy, they fail to realize that it probably harms certain people too. And in fact, peer review in general sometimes is based on opinion also most of the time. And some people have to fight against general opinion, and it's an uphill battle. Let's look at the logical flaws coming from all three of them. Very consistent, but consistent on the wrong things. That firstly, they assume that this would somehow allow smaller companies to push for peer review. Now, let's be honest, that this is status quo. But if that is status quo, why don't we see it happening even more? Because firstly, to go through the process, it's really expensive in the first place. Expensive in the first place to get scientists to agree with you, especially if something is unconventional. So a lot of companies are less willing to go through that risk, or else they will go through a form of bankruptcy, and then their patents might be bought up or probably fall into obscurity, something they didn't engage on. But even if we were to take somehow the University of Helsinki would go in the middle of rural Sarawak and somehow find these people would actually to actually assist them, The first problem is that you have an uphill battle to disprove because something that is new or somehow unconventional, and he has to prove it to his other bots over there. That is assuming that they can get context in the first place, which will assume people in the middle of the rural areas of countries wouldn't be able to get the context that I said in my scenario earlier on. Second of all, I said that now alternative medicine, when they go through litigation, they would achieve a bad name. Apparently, people are so stupid to actually believe that everything is the same. But when it comes to litigation, their logic also equates to we should stop going to doctors because they've been through medical negligence before. We don't think that is the logic. But that also somehow is not sensitive to the idea that governments wouldn't allow toxic things to actually be circulated around the market, because it's logical to infer that poisonous things wouldn't be in the market or allowed to be distributed by the government in the first place, because it's the prerogative of the government to do so logically. That is not the debate. The debate is about whether something is effective. Should we actually fund it or not? We say we don't mind its effectiveness. But there were two issues in this debate. Is there really an asymmetry of power when it comes to peer review? And second of all, who assists the smaller companies at the end of the day? Is that firstly, they failed to actually argue on why this biasness is not actually a legitimate threat, without actually understanding is that when MNCs feel threatened because they see a new cure within the market, then logically they would actually put up full force to counter whatever rhetoric that comes from a new one, especially when it's unconventional and people are not sure of it. Then they fail to actually somehow engage in the idea of cultural bias by saying, look, governments could actually somehow intervene and somehow stop the racists in the University of Helsinki. But we think that these people are not malicious, but it's because when they are educated, they are taught there's certain medicines that will probably not work. It's hard for them to accept certain medicines because it's not something that they see every day. That is why Chinese medicine took a long time to actually somehow survive within the market. But who assists these companies most of the time? Is that on our side, we assist these companies even more because they get funded, and throughout after that, maybe in the future, they will get peer review instead of being ignored directly by them. Theirs are supporting ignorance.
End the debate and the case like government, and invite the government to speak. Here.
Mr. Speaker, in today's debate, there are three main stakeholders. Main stakeholders are the people involved, the people who take these medications. Secondly, the field of alternative medication. And thirdly, the state. On-site government, we are protecting all three, and I'll explain to you why. First, let's look at the people, since this is most important. And frankly, I find one of the funniest things that we've had in this debate. Because what they've told us is that the people know the risk of taking these alternative medicines, they know the harms, and the government has already removed all the dangerous medicines from the shelves. Wow. First, our simple answer to that was the only way the government can know that these medications are dangerous, that they should be removed from the health, the only way they can educate people on the harms of this alternative medicine is by having peer review. If you don't have peer review, if you don't have research, how can you possibly know that these medications are dangerous, right? For their argument to stand, our motion has to stand. So that's quite a contradiction coming from their side. Secondly, they told us that let's say even if they know all these harms, people have a choice. They want to have peace of mind, right? And that's important to them. We say fine, peace of mind is important. But when you're on the government's dime, when the government is paying for your treatment, the government has a duty to you. Because a duty of a government is always to protect its people, to serve in their best interest. That's why the social contract was signed. It's to ensure that governments protect their people. Therefore, when the government is responsible for your treatment, your peace of mind is not the forefront of the government's thoughts. What is their main objective is curing you. We don't care if you die a happy person, we'd rather you live for the next 20 years. Their side would rather put them in the ground, right? Let's look at the second stakeholder, alternative medicine, and this is a very important part of this debate. Because what they've told you is there's this whole form of cultural bias and racial bias and God knows what other biases they had towards alternative medicine. And what did we tell you, especially in my speech? We explained to you extensively about why it exists, right? When you have any form of bias, it's because there's no form of approval. There's no form of background or scientific backing to give these alternative medicines a leg to stand on. Modern physicians view them as unproven and unscientific. By forcing these alternative medicines to undergo peer review, what you then have is you give them that clout. You tell people that these medications are proof, that they are safe to use, that they should be used. And that's something that will better it. On a second level, the second thing that they told you, and I find this funny, was Then now that all these MNCs are going to go out there and they are going to stop any other cure they find. Firstly, if you're an MNC and you find a cure for a new drug by a smaller company, you buy that and you exploit it. You want that cure for yourself because that's what's going to earn you money, right? If you can cure a new disease on the market, you're going to earn a huge load of cash, and that's what MNCs will do. On a second level, we don't see why that's bad because it progresses alternative medicine. If MNCs now come and buy these alternative medicines and they push for it, make it peer-reviewed, even better for them to make it into the mainstream. Third thing that they told you on this issue was that you're now going to have these small companies will make a lot of money and you'll have legitimate medicine for the market. Now let's think of it logically, like what we told you. What they are doing is they want to put new drugs on the market to ensure profits for small companies at the expense of people's lives. We are talking about medications here, we are talking about medicines. The difference whether it works or it doesn't work is whether someone lives or dies. That's not something any state can do. It's not in a research lab anymore, it's out on the market, it's affecting people's lives. On to our last issue, right? State, and this is something they really didn't engage with, because we told you a duty of the state is to ensure the best usage of its funds. We recognize that the funds come from the taxpayers, it comes from regular people like you and me, and we are funding the treatment of other individuals, strangers. Because of that, because of our hard-earned money, the state has a duty to ensure that that money is channeled in the best possible way. Because there's so many other stakeholders out there, there are many other policies that need to be addressed to, there needs to be proper allocation. On our side of the house, we do that. We protect every stakeholder. They don't. Thank you.
I thank the young advice speaker. You all can talk about chicken. Just a reminder to silent laws. Also, your food's in the fourth floor or down there. Yeah. No, I'll see you for Ivy open. It's damn cool. See? Cool, so you know. I was here to what? 10 to 10. Huh?